I realized that you can watch both TV shows and films on your TV, laptop, computer, tablet, phone, whatever. I realized that the screenplays you write for TV and for film virtually look the same software, same storytelling tools, same formatting considerations, a lot of the same stuff. And I realized that before you do either, you've got to have a script. But a huge mistake writers make is approaching writing a TV script like you would approach writing a film script. And the biggest part of the problem is the structure of the story. Both require a solid story that's well told, but how it's put together is very different. And I'm going to tell you how to do it and the critical mistake you have to avoid. We're going to start with a crash course on story and story structure, and then it will be easier to point out the differences in how stories function in the two different mediums of film and TV. Now, there are a lot of ways to organize stories. 3 acts, 4 acts, 5 acts. You may prefer Aristotle's model, or Freytag's, or Fry's, or Joe Hakyu's, or Kisho Tenketsu's. Doesn't matter, they all boil down to roughly the same thing with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so we are often back to Aristotle and a 3-act structure because it's the simplest and it pretty much encompasses the other models. And so what you have in every story is a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is the existing status quo, the middle is where the story takes place, take note of that, and then the end is finding a new status quo. And that's about as simple as I can make it. Now, I do pull all of this apart a whole lot more in my book on story and story structure, which is linked below if you're interested. But hopefully you're hearing me when I say the story takes place in the second act. This is an important part of the puzzle. And if you've been around for, I don't know, probably 3 or more videos of mine, you've probably heard me say this, which is an adaptation of Howard and Mabley's definition of story. It's this: a story is about someone who wants something badly, is having trouble getting it, and they get it or they don't. That's what a story is. And all of that is what happens in the second act. Now, don't misunderstand and think that definition of story encompasses the whole script. It doesn't. It encompasses the second act. You still also need a beginning, and you still need an end. And fundamentally, that is all you need. A beginning where there's a status quo, that status quo gets disrupted, and then it's the story itself, which takes place in the second act. The someone who wants something badly is having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't part. And then after those events, and whether the character gets it or not, that impacts the end of the script and gets us to a new status quo. And if you can understand just that, and I've tried to say it in a couple of different ways, so hopefully one of them makes sense to you. If you can understand that, you are way ahead of the curve. And for you to understand the difference between TV and film structure, it will make it so much easier if you can understand what a story is at its most basic level. So let's use Dune as an example, and it's okay if you haven't seen it or you aren't familiar with it. I'm not getting into the weeds here. This will still make sense for you. Dune, the recent movies, are based on a book, and many people love the book. I'm sure some of you are huge super fans of all of the Dune books, but the first novel in the Dune series is what the recent films are based on. Now, let's think about the book for a second. The book is a complete story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Life as normal. Paul's life is disrupted. He must choose to go down a new path, become who he was made to be, meant to be, whatever wording you want to use, and then a new status quo is put in place. That's a story, and that's in the book. But when they made a movie, they took the story of the book and chopped it in half and made a part 1 and a part 2. Now, even if you haven't seen those movies, but you understand what a story is and what a story isn't, I bet you can quickly surmise why those movies did not do as well as one might have hoped. I mean, they've got a great cast, great director, it's a fascinating world, right? Like, visuals are awesome, but why did it do so good? Well, it's because each movie is an incomplete story. Part 1 is the first half of the novel story, and then it just ends. Part 2 has the second half of the story, so it starts in the middle. Now, as a whole, the movies are one whole story, but in their respective parts, neither is a story, at least not a complete and satisfying story. And this is why, generally, only the people who are huge fans of Dune liked the movies. They're the only ones who can keep track of the lore and what is happening across both films. They know what's going on. They know what's at stake. Whereas people not familiar with the books feel unsatisfied because they never get a whole story when watching one of the movies. So think of films like you would think of a novel. It has to be a whole thing. There must be a beginning, a middle, and an end to it. And when there isn't, it feels hollow or empty or incomplete and definitely unsatisfying. In theory, you should be able to sit down, watch a movie, and get the whole story. That's what audiences expect, and that's what you need to give them. And when they don't get a whole story, they get frustrated, and they don't like it. But film stories are not structured like TV shows. TV shows work very differently when it comes to how stories are structured. And there are two types of TV shows, and both respond to structure a little different. And those two types are serials and episodics. A serial is a TV show that you have to watch in order. The Witcher, Game of Thrones, Stranger Things, Breaking Bad. Now you can watch one-off episodes or an episode here or there, but for the most part, they are meant to be watched in order. These are serials. And the term comes from back in the days when newspapers were all the rage and authors would release stories slowly over time, like chapters of a book. And each chapter would be in a new edition of the newspaper, the serial. The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes is one of the more famous serials, if you want to know. But in those serials, each chapter had a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginnings and endings were very short, but there was a main character, and they wanted something badly, had trouble getting it, and they got it or they didn't, all within each serial. But as a result of them getting it or not, it posed a new problem and created a cliffhanger for the next chapter, the next serial. So, for example, in one serial, the main tension, the thing the character is trying to figure out, might be, will Sherlock figure out who the handkerchief belongs to? And in that week's edition, you'd find out, only to learn it's the Duchess of Habsburg. And next week, the main tension is this, will Sherlock locate the Duchess of Habsburg? And on it went. You read them in order, and some TV shows are that way. But there are also episodics. Episodics are most common as sitcoms or as network TV shows. So think of your favorite cop, lawyer, medical show. Nearly all of them are episodics. You can watch them out of order. It doesn't matter. So whether it's a Rescue 911 or a Criminal Minds or a Friends or an Office, watch them out of order, it still makes sense. And yes, there are strings that span the whole series, but for the most part, it doesn't matter what order you watch them in. Episodics also have a beginning, a middle, and an end, all within each episode. But here's one big difference between film and TV. The characters in TV move very little or very slowly if they move at all. But in film, they may have a major arc within the course of the film. And the reason is, especially if it's an episodic show, the status quo at the beginning of the show and at the end of the show must be very close to the same for each episode. They are that way so you can watch them out of order. You're not really missing anything. Doesn't matter what order you watch them in, the characters are roughly the same at the beginning and at the end of each episode. Now sure, there might be slow movements over a season, but generally the nature of the characters and their relationship with other characters is the same at the end of the episode as it was at the beginning. So in a movie, two characters might meet, fall in love, and get married, beginning, middle, end. But in a TV show, they might meet and only be friends for several episodes, maybe even several seasons. And yes, they might eventually get married in season 10, but there is not a change from episode to episode. And this is a result of the structure. TV episodes are essentially Act 2, over and over and over and over and over again. Each episode is an Act 2. Now there might be a scene or two of an Act 1 for that particular episode at the beginning. There might be a scene or two of an Act 3 for that particular episode at the end, but that's it. The rest is all Act 2. Someone who wants something is having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. And so if you're watching a TV show that has 10 episodes in season 1, you are watching 10 different Act 2s. One per episode. At least you should be. And I'm coming back to that in a second. A quick word about TV pilots. The first episode in a series, that's a pilot, they work a little bit different. They often have what you would think of as a standard Act 1. It's shorter, but they often have a normal Act 1. Normal life that gets disrupted, and then we're off to repeat an Act 2. And you repeat the Act 2 for as long as the show runs. And if they know when the series finale is, then they can write a more normal Act 3 as they wrap up the series. But here's the critical mistake. Aspiring writers come up with an idea for a story, they get into it, and it's really big and long. And it ends up being, 300 pages. Okay, way too long for a movie. And so Skippy, the intrepid writer, thinks, well, I'll just split 300 pages up into 8 40 to 45 minute episodes. It'll be perfect. And then you end up with a disaster, like Lord of the Rings TV show, Rings of Power, where it takes 2 or 3 episodes just to figure out what is going on and who is who. Because the first 3 episodes were the Act 1 of a movie that had been chopped up into little pieces. And that is not how audiences want TV shows to work. And so basically what aspiring writers do, or people who don't understand there's a difference in how TV shows and films are structured, is they take their one idea and, a la Dune, chop it up into pieces. But their one story is now split across multiple things that should each be restructured in a way so that each episode or each serial is its own story, complete story. But the sum of the episodes together are also telling a larger story. And in fact, TV shows actually have 3 stories going on at once. There's the story for each individual episode, there's the story for the entire season, and there's a story for the entire series, and all have to be served. You can't have one story and just split it up into 8 parts. I mean, you can if you want people to not like it, and they won't like it because they're expecting a complete story in each episode, a complete story for the whole season, and a complete story for the whole series. And the critical mistake is that the second act gets split up between episodes or between movies. And it is extremely unsatisfying for an audience, and it would not happen if the structure of the story was paid attention to. So it's fine to write a serial or an episodic TV show. Both are fun and have their place, and different stories work better in different ones. But you have to make sure you have an entire second act in each episode or in each film. Someone who wants something badly is having trouble getting it, and they get it or they don't. That must be in each episode or in each film. Otherwise, you're going to end up with Dune, or Rings of Power, or many other shows that tend to be one season and done, because that's not what audiences want to watch or what they're expecting. And that's not what you want. You want to find success, so you have to pay attention to the expectations of others when it comes to the craft of telling stories. Now, you may have some questions about screenwriting or structure or whatever. You can drop them in the comments below, but I also answered several common questions in a series of videos I did, and the first one of those you can watch by clicking right here. Thank you for watching. Fun buttons and links below, including my book on structure. And when you tell a story, make sure you tell the whole story and tell a story that matters. See you later.